Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Meg Sanders, CEO of Cannabis. Thank you very much for joining me today, Meg.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach us. You can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Meg, I always like to start each episode with a little bit of background, and you have 14 years of experience under your belt. You know, how did you get your start in cannabis?
It seems like way longer than 14 years, but I started in Colorado right in 2009 when basically the Cole memo had come out, and that became sort of a carte blanche for a whole bunch of people to start opening dispensaries and grows all throughout Colorado without any regulation or anything. It was just like, let's go. And did that for a long time, was basically CEO of a company called Mindful until 2017. And then we ended up selling that company, and I ended up more moving to consulting side of cannabis because there was just such a huge need for expertise in the space. And honestly, there wasn't a ton then. So there was a big demand as each state came online to help. And we did that with my partner, Eric Williams, for a long time. And that was, probably a few years that we were consulting, and then ended up moving to the East Coast and really focusing on Massachusetts. And we had several clients here, really enjoyed working in the state. And one of the clients asked us to come on as operators, which is what we did. And basically started Cannabis. And it really started, we opened our first store in Lee, Massachusetts, right off the turnpike in the Berkshires, which is such a beautiful part of the country. And then also Holyoke, which is where our second dispensary is.
What was it that drew you to cannabis?
Oh, I think for me, it was really more a brand new industry, brand new business, brand new everything, right? So I'm an entrepreneur at heart, really love starting things and figuring out various problems and obstacles in getting from point A to point B. And it just ended up being a really good fit that this industry was kicking off just as I was kind of in a moment in time where I wasn't thrilled with what I was doing at the time. So it just worked out perfect to kind of jump in and be an entrepreneur and get going.
What were you doing previously?
I worked for a small financial office in Colorado. Yeah, I basically managed the compliance there. So kind of actually was a one compliant industry to another compliant industry. That was not a huge leap either.
Yeah. What was the transition like from consulting to the operational side of the business? Was it easy? Did your entire bag of tricks work as expected, or were there some unexpected differences?
Oh, there was massive differences. I think part of it was just we were dealing with also a brand new regulatory body. So they didn't know either. I mean, we all didn't know. Period. It was just really just trying to work together as much as possible. And I would say that Colorado, which at the time was the Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division, and now it's the Marijuana Enforcement Division. I have to say that, for regulators, they really owned that they didn't know either, and we're working it out together. And they were great partners. Like, I mean, we could call with any question. They would come out and go, I'm not sure. Let me go ask. It was never like, don't call them, because if they come and then there's a problem, you're going to get a big write-up and you're going to get in trouble. It wasn't that way, at least with our relationship with our regulators. And, but yeah, we were learning together. And then as each new state goes online, it's the same process. You have operators, maybe more seasoned operators, but you really do have brand new regulators that really don't understand the industry. They don't understand the plant that much. They don't understand how the process works. And we find ourselves, we're still really educating those that regulate us on this is an outdoor grow. Guess how outdoor grows don't have lights? Outdoor grows don't have HVAC. So it's just kind of a really interesting process to work through to educate a regulatory body.
Was it the same kind of collaboration when you moved to Massachusetts?
I would say it's a little bit of a different experience here. Definitely more, they play it way more close to the vest, I think. We've been fortunate in that we've had a handful of really good investigators that we've worked with, that we've learned a ton from, and we're able to kind of bounce stuff off of it. But we're dealing with some pretty unique challenges in the industry right now, and honestly, the regulators don't have enough staff or bandwidth to really handle all the issues. So I can give you a really good example of advertising. So advertising has pretty strict rules on it, though no one really seems to follow them. And so we'll get a notice of, hey, you're doing this. And I'm like, yeah, but so are 50 dispensaries within a 5-mile radius of me. So, it's kind of like I have to compete. I can't not compete. And if everybody isn't playing by the same rules, then what's the point of the rules? So I think there's a lot of overreach and a lot of over-regulation that probably started out of fear of, we don't know what's going to happen. But we've been doing this for a while now, at least 6 years. And to me, the sky hasn't fallen. We really have not seen massive issues in this space in Massachusetts. I mean, a handful of bad actors, a handful of, errors or issues. But for the most part, I would say that the industry is successfully doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I would say our biggest role is to make sure that product doesn't fall into hands of kids, that all the products that we're carrying obviously are through the seed to sale tracking system of Metric, and they're fully tested and labeled properly, and that we're doing right by employees and making sure that we're reporting everything every day with regards to sales and paying our excise taxes and all the fun money part of this industry as well. So I think it's a really interesting time right now, where I know that there are a handful of things that the CCC could do. The CCC is our regulatory body. They could do to really ease a lot of strain and pressure off of the business that is just not necessary. So we're really hoping that we see some big changes over the next few months.
What are some of those changes that you're hoping for?
I'll give you one example. I can give you several examples, but here's one that I think really shows an inefficiency. And that is, for every license that I have, which I have 5 licenses, I have to have an agent card, a registration card that basically says my license number, who I am, my birth date, when the card expires. Okay. And that also requires a background check for each one of those licenses. So think about that. That's a lot of administrative work to keep me with 5 cards. And then I have to have all those cards on me when I'm in various facilities. And 3 of those licenses are for the same facility. So unlike Colorado and a handful of other states, in Colorado, the badge goes to the person. And I'm badged with specific licenses. And I just have to report, or the business has to report, oh, now this license number, blah, 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 is now working here or is consulting here. And it's so much more efficient, but it's even better in that in Colorado, for example, the individual is responsible for going to get the badge. So right there is a phenomenal screening tool, right? You can either handle that process or you can't. And it's not an arduous process, but it is a process. And wouldn't it be great if we were dealing with people that were already badged, already vetted through the CCC, and we could just hire them and go? But instead, if I work at this facility for a year and a half, and then I go to this next facility for a new time frame, I have to start the process all over, get a new badge, get a new background check. And that's just, it's super expensive for the businesses because it's about $135 a card. And think about that. I have 5, and we have, almost 100 employees. Do the math. So it's a very burdensome process, and there's no reason to be background checking me 5 times. It just doesn't make any sense. So I just feel like that's a really good example of an inefficiency that they're aware of. We've heard multiple times that they were going to address it. I mean, for years we've been hearing this, even pre-pandemic, and they're not addressing it. And there's a handful of other weird ones, like even though we're fully cameraed, every single thing we do inside and outside our facility is fully on camera and held for 90 days. We hold it for 92 days just to make sure. Even though that's the case, when I'm wasting product or wasting plant material, I have to have 2 people with me. So not that I have to have 3 total. I'm saying there has to be 2 people in that process.
Yeah.
And think about that from a payroll standpoint. I mean, it's kind of like the badging in that I have to have pretty much a full-time person managing badging and making sure everybody's, keeping up with their expiration dates and stuff. And that's just super expensive. So that's a really great example. And I'll give you another example of something that they actually recently addressed, sort of, which is we had a rule here where we had to have 2 drivers in any transport vehicle. Including delivery. So they recently changed that, but they didn't change it for all of the delivery or transports. And I'm just like, this just doesn't make any sense. So again, super expensive, paying 2 people full time to ride in a van together because the CCC says that's what we should be doing. But meanwhile, pretty hardcore pharmaceutical drugs are delivered via FedEx. Like they're not even in a regulated van. They are delivered FedEx. I've been in pharmacies when that's happened. So I kind of feel like we're still very much in the prohibition or the fear part of cannabis and not in the, hey, this is an industry. And for the most part, we've got a lot of professionals working in it. And we need to take our hands off the wheel a little bit and let the business do what the business needs to do for the business sake, not for the sake of fear.
Well, it sounds like you're optimistic that more changes might be coming. Are you working with the CCC, or what's the cause of that optimism?
We work with a industry group that we use as our sounding board for the most part, as opposed to 100 voices yelling at them. There's just one that they have a good relationship with. And I think the challenge is they are so drowning right now in work. And I think a lot of it is just, like I said, just work that just should not even be on the radar. That anything new that's coming to them, I think one commissioner quoted, anything new that hits our table right now, it'll be at least 6 months before we can even look at it. That's really not helpful because we're not shifting fast enough for what is happening in the industry. We're just not. And it kind of seems like the squeaky wheel or the biggest issue of the day is sometimes what usurps common sense. And I feel like that's a challenge probably in most government stuff. But I do know how alcohol works here in Massachusetts, and it's very efficient. They handle tons of licenses. I mean, tons of licenses. And the process is so much easier. So I feel like I'm hopeful that we will make some progress. I know they're currently looking for a new executive director, and I'm hoping it is somebody that's very forward thinking and really taking the gloves off and just saying, what are we doing? Why are we torturing ourselves and our clients? Because you have to remember, we pay fees to the CCC. We pay licensing fees, agent fees, you name it, right? Renewal fees. By definition, I'm their client. By definition, Canna Provisions is their customer. And I think sometimes that gets lost. And I can tell you, Department of Revenue in Colorado is who oversees the enforcement division. And they were the ones who pointed that out to me. And I was like, I'm so grateful. I'm really grateful that you said that's your take on the people that you were overseeing. And it was quite refreshing. And I now use that all the time. I'm just like, but we're your client. By definition, this is a transaction of which I'm paying you for a piece of paper to operate. And by definition, I'm your client. So we need to have a little more customer service thinking, forward thinking, I think, and a little more customer service thoughtfulness, especially with regards to regulations that just no longer fit the narrative of what's happening. Just we have such bigger issues, so much bigger issues than did I put a discount code on a website or I could go on and on with the silliness of it, but it's just an example of a million ways that we probably can all do a little bit better.
Some of those bigger issues, I read that you've done a fair amount of work on the legislative side of things. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And has any of that helped you out in your current operations in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say that my partner, Eric, who is definitely long time in politics and in government, he is who taught me a lot about how to handle things and how to do it and what to expect. And so with his guidance, I think we have learned a ton. But I would say that each state is different on how you're able to work with your legislators. And I would say that Colorado is a very open legislative process in that you can pick up the phone and call anybody and go see them. It's just very, very, very easy. And they'll take your call and they call you back. I would say that our experience here, depending on the legislator, we've not necessarily had that much access. And then in particular, when it comes to specific bills going through, they really want industry groups, not individuals, or it feels like they really want industry groups, not individuals coming in and talking about it. But at the end of the day, I've done this a really long time. As far as people in Massachusetts, I'm probably one of the more experienced humans. And we have people that have never operated at all on committees and work groups with the CCC. They've never even run a business. And I'm like, how is this happening? And it's not like they're scientists or doctors or that kind of thing. Nope, that's not it. And it kind of just is one of those glaring, wow, we really need to figure out how we get people that have a lot of knowledge about the space into places where we can give really thoughtful feedback and work with regulators and legislators to make sure thoughtful regulations are moving forward in an efficient way. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of employees here in Massachusetts that work for cannabis companies. And that right there should be a huge motivation to really service the industry better.
Is part of the issue, when I think of regulators and other traditional industries like manufacturing at large, I think of regulators that are people that have worked in the industry their entire career, retired out, and still want to do some good in the industry. Is it that cannabis is such a young industry that there's just not a large pool of people with industry knowledge?
I think that's probably part of it.
Or that people that are familiar with the cannabis industry like yourself want to be in it,
Yeah. Well, I would say that first and foremost, you just need to start with the pay rate. Yeah. And when you look at what the job postings are and what the pay is available, it's not surprising that we're having challenges. It just isn't. And, the other issue is that for forever, and this is something we've brought up multiple times, and I can't say for sure that I know if they've ever addressed this, but I don't think they have. You have to have like some significant police experience to be an investigator. I mean, right there, aren't we setting up a situation of we're perpetrators and they're cops? Like that just seems like we're setting a really crappy table for a relationship, because cops are cops and they come in as cops. And when you're trained as a cop and wanted to still be, basically encouraged to still be that, that's what we're dealing with. And I just feel like that's not who runs liquor. It's not how it works. And so I question some of the soundness of how we started. And I really hope we shift out of this. Everyone in cannabis potentially is a bad person, as opposed to, hey, most people in cannabis are actually pretty good. So let's not legislate to the lowest common denominator. Let's legislate to the norm and then pour more resources into the lowest common denominators to either get them out or get them better. And I feel like that's really, I think, should be a huge goal for everybody involved in this space. Let me just point out one other issue right now, which I think tons of states are dealing with. Well, I know they are. We have a completely unregulated hemp industry producing psychoactive, highly chemical processed synthetic cannabis for the most part. None of it's regulated. Not the testing is hit or miss. Believe me, I always ask for COAs whenever I see it. I'm like, hey, let me see the COA. And, oh, it says there's a COA. And you scan the barcode, and it's from 2019. And I'm like, bullshit. That's not even true. And I'm telling you, I say this because I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous that a gas station or convenience stores or bodegas or fill in the blank, anybody are selling product that hasn't been through any type of true inspection process, and there's no regulatory body. So FDA isn't overseeing it, pharma, it's kind of like there's no thoughtfulness about what we're doing, and we're just all just going, well, I don't know what to do about it. And I'm like, you regulate me so heavily, and I have to have all of these things, but right across the street from me is somebody who isn't doing anything that I'm doing, not paying the money I'm paying to be in the space, and selling stuff that hasn't been tested. And I don't even know where it's from, and I don't know how they got it, or even if it's effective. But I do know that I'm hearing more and more stories of intoxicating hemp really creating health issues for people. So it's a significant issue. I think it's a huge loophole that is very, very damaging to all cannabis and hemp. And I feel like we need to get our arms around this. It's a significant problem.
I completely agree. And it is kind of shocking to me as to how, it hasn't even flown under the radar. Like, it is out in front of everybody. And that's kind of the billboards across every city that I've seen. It's surprising to me that they're allowed to operate in that type of environment. When you talk about some of the health issues, what are some of the things that you've seen?
Significant impairment for a long period of time. I have a really good friend who bought a 500 milligram Delta 9 candy, just out of curiosity, honestly. He was just kind of R&Ding on his own. He was high for 2 days. Like, he could not leave his house for 2 days. That's just not okay. And it worries me. It really worries me. I have kids. I have a daughter who's 22 years old, and I worry that somebody's going to give her something like that's bought right out in the open, and she's potentially impaired beyond ability to control her environment or her body. And that scares me. I've heard one of the biggest complaints we get, because we do really try to keep our arms around what is going on. What are these gummies? Who's manufacturing them? Who's manufacturing the chocolates? Who's manufacturing the can of pre-rolls this big that they're selling as singles, just like kind of in the old days when you can buy single cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I guess the biggest stuff I hear is the headaches that people get after they take them. So very concerning. And I'm not talking just the gummies and the chocolates. I'm talking about vapes and a million other things that I'm shocked at the ability of mass production of intoxicating hemp products. And I'm not saying that I don't want intoxicating hemp products. I just want them to go through some type of system that ensures public safety. And I think that that's a fair request. I think that's more than fair.
I completely agree with you. Because if a product is available over the counter, there is this inherent belief that it is safe by the consumer. I was with a friend this weekend, and he was into his Delta 8 gummies. And I was just like, you have no idea what's in there, man. And but he's just like, no, bought them at a store. They got to be safe for me. I'm just like, and it's that sort of sentiment that like, it kind of scares me too, where it's just like, I agree with you that there needs to be much more oversight and just basic testing in terms of what's going into that process.
I'm 100% with you. I just feel like consumer ignorance is a big thing. Mm-hmm. And people believe that they see it advertised on Facebook or on a store shelf that it must be safe. And it's not. Mm-hmm. I can't say with any certainty that the product that you're getting even has Delta 8 or Delta 9 or Delta THCP or THC, you name it, right? All the different compounds we're seeing. And the other thing that I think most people don't understand is the chemical process in order to make those. So if there's actually stuff in them, the chemical process to do it is really kind of gross, personally. So I, for one, feel strongly that it's our I think it's the biggest threat to the industry. I think it's the biggest threat to public safety right now. I think it's incredibly dangerous what we're doing. And I'm shocked that I can't get Department of Health or the governor. I'm really shocked that we can't get our arms around this. And there is a law on the books here in Massachusetts that states minor cannabinoids, including, and gives the laundry list, Delta 8, Delta 9, and synthetic cannabinoids are not allowed unless you're through a process, through a cannabis regulated license. But even then, like Delta 8 and Delta 9, like we're not going to make that. Delta 8 anyway. And now there's Delta 10 and Delta 12 and Delta 87. I don't know. I guess my point is there's a law in the books right now and we can't get it enforced. So I don't know what to say about that. Yet I'm treated like a criminal or perceived criminal from the regulatory agency that we work with. So it's just so backwards. And I think about alcohol. Alcohol is so protective of their domain. And if this was happening in alcohol, if there was some synthetic alcohol that we could sell, it can, like at my store, if it wasn't alcohol would have a fit. Mm-hmm. They would have a fit, but they're older. They have better lobby power. They've been doing this for much longer than we have. And so unfortunately their pockets are way deeper than ours. And kind of this existential threat in general with cannabis that we are, as an industry, really struggling. And that's the truth. The taxation, the excise tax, there's just a lot of pressure on consumers, a lot of pressure on manufacturers and cultivators. And I just feel like we have to right the ship. And I wish I could say, and this is how we do it. Here is the game plan. But it starts with descheduling. That's obviously a huge topic, and rescheduling is not necessarily the answer or the nirvana that some people seem to think that it's going to be. I don't think. I am very pessimistic about the process and very pessimistic about how this is going to shake out, but we'll see. And I think the reality is this plant is, we know that it's way safer than a lot of other things that are just freely available on the market. And I think the other big thing is just the thriving legacy market, or the thriving, people call it black market, gray market, whatever. But there is a thriving legacy market. And the reason it's thriving is because states and municipalities are too greedy about cannabis. And I say this all the time whenever they publish numbers about Massachusetts and in particular, and we have a slower growth rate than a lot of other states, unfortunately. But whenever they publish, this is our biggest month ever, and I'm like, and you are the only one winning. So all the rest of us are really, really, I would say most people in cannabis are struggling.
You describe the manufacturing process for some of these unregulated products as gross. For the uninitiated, can you describe that process a little bit for us?
I can't give you the exact chemical, but I do know that there is a lot of chemical, there's a lot of process that needs to happen in order to get that final product. And again, you don't even know if you're getting that final product. So I know that there's people way smarter than me that can talk about the exact ins and outs of it. But I do know enough of what I've heard, especially just Delta 8, Delta 9 stuff. I'm like, are you kidding me? I kind of feel like we're going down this path of Jules. And you remember, if you haven't seen the documentary, watch it. But look at what happened. And that it's so incredible. Like, when are we going to learn from history? We have already done this experiment. And by the way, you know who paid the price? Kids. And that's the thing that is just infuriating to me. We're so concerned about kids getting cannabis, but we're not concerned about kids getting synthetic cannabis. And I'm just baffled. I'm baffled that I can walk down the street to any vape store and buy any intoxicating hemp product I want. And they sort of look at my ID.
Yeah.
Sort of.
The worst one I heard, I believe, was out of Virginia, and they were selling pre-rolls that were shredded paper covered in oil.
Oh my God.
And it's just, to hear that, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like that should be a significant enough red flag for somebody to do something.
Yeah. Well, I think the other part of this is just the flavoring, just the fact that we're making bubble gum vaporizers, like who do we think wants that? Who do we think is going to be enticed by that? It's so irresponsible. And I feel like flavored papers are just as bad. I don't know. I'm, I, I'm kind of an old hippie by heart, so I'm way more organic and thoughtful about that kind of stuff. But, I feel like we've seen this movie before, and I don't know why we don't shut it down. I just don't get it. And again, I'm not saying that I want hemp shut down or that I want any of this to stop. I want it to go through a regulated process and make sure that kids aren't getting their hands on it, because that's what's happening. And it's terrifying to me. I mean, I have adult children. I can't imagine if I had teenage children right now. I think I would spend a lot of time educating them about how bad it was. And by the way, I'd much rather they access safe, tested cannabis than this crap.
No, it's weird, the conversations that, because I have a 5 and a 3-year-old, and I think about that all the time, where it's like, okay, well, I'm comfortable with you using this at this point. Don't touch this. It's just a different conversation than my parents had to have with me.
Yeah, very different, right? But also think about how far we've come. I mean, I love that we're having these conversations. And I love that, like, our kids, my kids and my partner's kids grew up asking, "Hey, is this a safe cookie?" Like, they knew to ask because we had cannabis in our house.
Mm-hmm.
And then they knew when they went to friends' houses, be sure to ask. Don't just grab a cookie and eat it. Make sure you ask, especially if it's homemade or looks homemade, or you just never know. And that's a smart way to raise a kid. Just don't eat a cookie because it's there. Make sure you understand, hey, does this have cannabis in it? Does this have mushrooms in it? What does it have in it? Because I don't want to have a bad trip.
Talking about your partner, Eric, how did you guys meet?
We met through cannabis, honestly. We were working in Connecticut, right when Connecticut was trying to get legislation through. They were the first state to pass cannabis through the legislature instead of a voter initiative. And so we were working there, and he was working there because he wrote the law. He was basically I say single-handedly because I'm super proud of him, but I know there's people that helped. But I feel he was instrumental, absolutely responsible for making sure that safe access happened in Connecticut. And he had a mission of decriminalizing and getting a medical program on the books with Connecticut. And he wanted to do that over a period of 5 years. And he cranked it out in 16 months. And we were really excited about that because it was basically the second state to come online with a true medical program that was regulated. And we were working hard trying to figure out if we could work there, if we could get a license there, finding real estate. And that's how we met. And just through working together, we just really found we're super aligned. And it was a great fit for us to be together. And it was also, cannabis is wickedly intense. I would say nobody really understands it until you get in it. And it's kind of like you're a frog in the pot, kind of, and that's also kind of funny. I'm a frog sitting in weed, but I meant frog in a boiling pot, and you don't realize the water's boiling. It just takes a lot of energy and effort to run a cannabis company, I guess the way we want to run it, and everybody that I know that's successful or holding on with a solid platform, they are not just owners operating from afar, they're instrumental in the business every day. And when they're not, it doesn't go as well. So working that hard, I would not see him if he wasn't in this industry. And if he was in this industry and I wasn't, then I wouldn't see him. So it kind of works nicely that we have this huge passion about the plant, and this huge passion about running a thoughtful company, and that we get to work together. So we're together a lot. And I don't know, I think probably a lot of relationships couldn't handle that, but I can't imagine, like, when we go a few days and he's doing something in one location and I'm in another location, I'm like, man, I really miss you. So I hope that that's how it continues forever. So we're good.
What's it like to be a woman in cannabis?
I wish I could say it's unique to cannabis, but I don't think it is. And I'm in I do a lot of work in coaching and cohorts and women's groups and that kind of thing. So I don't think that cannabis is unique in this situation. I would say overall leadership is pretty lonely for the most part. I would say any leader would tell you that. It's just how it is. It's tricky. And being a woman in business in particular, especially in a high capital intensive business, areas where you need to be working on transactions and money raises and all that. For the most part, the money is coming from, white men. And I'm often the only person, the only female at the table, or one of two people at the table. And I would say that part gets old. It gets old talking about golf, and it gets old. I don't know. I'm a huge sports fan, so I love talking about sports. That's not the point, but they don't ever want to talk about what I want to talk about either. So I would say socially, it's pretty isolating in that you just kind of sit there and go through the motions of a dinner or whatever with a group, 10 men at the table, and you're just trying to get through the dinner and be polite and professional. I would say that is probably the biggest part, is that you just realize you're one of a few. And I really just wish we saw a lot more women coming to the table as leaders, and not just in cannabis, but overall. And I know that that's top of mind for a lot of people, and pay equity and making sure that women have access to all kinds of stuff. And it just all seems to be being challenged, and we seem to be going backwards. So it's concerning. I am concerned. I'm concerned about my daughter growing up in this world, and she's seen me in cannabis her whole life. So she knows how hard it is. And she knows how hard I work, and she understands that this world can be really tricky as a woman to navigate. And in particular in business, it's really tricky. I really wish we could figure out more women at the table with money to invest, and more women-led investment groups, and not always just dealing with super sharky experienced men that, just, in my opinion, probably eat their young. I don't know. It kind of feels like that sometimes.
No, I agree with you. In my opinion, I think the world might be a better place with more female leadership. Is the cannabis industry more accepting of women in leadership roles?
No.
No.
Mm-mm. I wish I could say it was, but I don't feel like it is. I mean, I've been doing this for a really long time. And when we started Canna Provisions, raising money was really hard. And I have a significant track record. And I just have I just have the inkling that if I wasn't involved and if it was all men running it, it might have been a different conversation. So yeah, it's a bummer to me that that it just seems like it's harder. And in particular I'll give you a really great example. Here's a really great example of women in cannabis. We had an inspection, I don't know, last year. I'm the only woman, so 6 investigators come, 6, all men. I'm the only woman standing in the foyer. They didn't even introduce themselves to me. I mean, literally went over me. It was just it was so shocking.
Yeah. And
that's indicative. And by the way, I'm a white woman, so I have significant more privilege than a woman of color. And I can't even imagine how difficult it is for a woman of color being in this space. I mean, actually I do. I speak to a lot of women in this space that are trying to open various businesses, and it's really difficult. And I think really what the lesson is that people like to work with people like them. So if if the white men have the money, they want to give the money to white men because that's what they know. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the lack of understanding of that, just basic psychology, is really interesting. I'll give you another example of that. Actually, it's so poignant. Somebody I worked with in Colorado was talking to me about this very subject. What's it like? What do you think? Why do you think this is? And I told him flat out, I'm like, because people like to do business with people that are like them. And he ended up hiring, knowing me, working with me, he ended up hiring a white male consultant to help him open his retail store. And I was just like, and this is exactly what the problem is. Exactly. I'm standing right in front of you. And you're asking me about how it is working in the space as a woman, and we're having conversations of why do you think it's harder? And I'm telling you flat out. And then like a week later, you don't talk to me about the position. You go hire some guy who's your friend. So I guess that's my point, is it just kind of is this self-perpetuating inertia, it just keeps going. And I don't know how to, I wish I could say, this is how we stop it. But I do think getting more thoughtful, smart women with access to capital in the space, I think would be incredibly beneficial. But I've not found that magic pile of money yet.
At Canna Provisions, you're a dispensary and a cultivation, right? Was the cultivation started at the same time as the dispensary?
No, we went right to retail because there were so few of them. We were the second standalone adult use retail to open in the Commonwealth, right behind Caroline and Uxbridge, who I adore, love them, love them. So yeah, we knew that first of all, to start cultivation, there wasn't that many stores open. So who are we going to sell to? And it was one of those things where, again, the men that raised the money thought it was better to do it a certain way and not raise all the money. Let's get the store going and then we'll go raise the rest of the money. And then they saw how well the stores were doing and then like, no, we're not going to do that. And long story short, we did it after the fact. And I would continue to advise that that's a great way to do it if you're going to be vertical. It gives you much more understanding of the industry, and gives you understanding of the market.
Okay.
I think is the right way to put that.
Okay. What is your philosophy? What type of grow do you guys have?
We haven't. Okay, this is so much fun. We have a tiny indoor grow, which is kind of where we started. Tiny. It's like under 5,000 feet. It's itty bitty. And we have a hoop house, which is phenomenal, and honestly grows the best weed. Grows the best weed. So, and then we have outdoor. So outdoor is fun and exciting, but also really hard. Here in Massachusetts in particular, but I'm still super proud of what we produce out of there. The hoop house does the most amazing plants, amazing flower. I mean, it just shows you how powerful the sun is, right?
Yeah.
And I think overall, the three for me gives us a lot of creative license. So it gives us the ability to kind of really have that craft feel inside. It allows us to produce a ton of weight outside that we turn into, biomass for manufacturers all throughout the state. And then we have this magic little hoop house that is so chirpy. I mean, the sun just is the right light. It just is. And it's so funny because people always say, well, if you had to do it again, what would you do? And I would say just hoop houses. I would just do hoop houses. So, we grow from March, and there's no environmentals in it. No heat, no AC, there's a fan. And there's just not any equipment in there. It's just a hoop house.
Yeah.
So super cost effective, grows great weed, and doesn't eat so much energy. I mean, God, we're energy hogs for indoor, even with LEDs, because you still need a ton of HVAC to service those LEDs. So for me, it's like the most efficient, environmental, and it produces great cannabis. And I would say, hands down, if I had to do it all over again, I would just run hoop houses.
When it comes to producing great cannabis, did you know that Smash Hits was going to be such a smash hit?
Yeah, because Chemdog already was a smash hit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were just adding a logo to Chem's awesome genetics, and now he's operating in our space, and he runs our cultivation, and he's a phenomenal operator. I mean, seriously, maniacal with spreadsheets and budgets, really, really thoughtful about process. He's really great. And I think that, so for me, no, I'm not surprised at all. Am I surprised that we kind of maybe got lucky with the Smash logo and the brand? Yeah, I think we got lucky with that. But when you're putting it on amazing genetics grown by a legend, I mean, I think you kind of we had an inside advantage, so to speak. So
How did the relationship come together with Chemdog?
it's such a funny little story. Eric went to meet him because we wanted to carry his glass. He's an amazing glass blower and has a huge following in that. We're just like, oh, wouldn't that be cool if we're carrying some Chemdog stuff? And he's legacy, and he also social equity because, of course, he was arrested for cannabis. And so we were just like, God, that's a great story. Let's meet him. And then we meet him, and he ends up being a phenomenal human being. You're like, oh my God, what a great dude! Because you never know, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then he actually said to us, he's like, I'd really love to work with you guys. And we're like, well, what do you mean? You mean want to blow glass for us more? Or what do you want to? He's like, no, no, no. He's like, maybe I could work in your cultivation. And we're just like, floored. We're like, a legend is asking to work with us. Yes, please hurry up. How fast can we get it done? And, you know, he, of course, he had a learning curve. He'd never worked in a commercial grow before, but I would say he's just been so great, such a great student of the plant and of the processes and all the different mechanics that are required to do this. And the fact that he's so passionate about it and he so fiercely protects it. And his staff loves him. So I feel like we just hit it out of the park with him. He's just, I can't say enough about Ken. I can't. And his family's phenomenal too. I mean, he's solid top to bottom. So we're really, really fortunate to work with a living legend who's a cool dude.
Well, you recently became employee owned. Why did you go down that path?
Oh, we went down that path because with our previous investors, we'd always had this idea that we wanted to set up a pool of either, you know, of profit sharing or some type of equity sharing, you know, something like that, that would empower employees to kind of win along with us. And they just refused to kind of do it. It just became this constant battle of, but what about the pool? We got to set up the pool. And they're like, we're not even concerned about the pool till you pay us all back. And I'm like, that's crazy, because you have people that are busting their butts right now. And we need it. Let's give them some carrots. Could not get it over the finish line. And so we ended up getting out from under those particular investors, and ended up pretty much finding out about, I'd never heard of an ESOP before. So we found out about it early last year, and we're like, wait a minute, this seems to be the answer to everything we're looking for, because we don't want to hand over equity directly, because that requires a whole bunch of monitoring and maintenance. And if somebody messes up and decides to rob a bank, the whole business could be at risk, even if they only own 2% of the company. Mm-hmm. So the direct ownership of a whole bunch of humans was not something I wanted to administrate. I'm just like, no, that's not up for me. I'm not up for that, I should say. But when push came to shove, this seemed to be kind of nirvana in a lot of ways. And this has been the goal for Eric and I since we started Canna Provisions. We really wanted to figure out how to reward employees through equity so that we're all aligned and rowing in the same boat with regards to the finances of the business and how to run the business. And the ESOP opportunity just really seemed to check all the boxes. It's super complicated. I wish I could say, oh, and it's so easy, but it's not. It's a very complicated process, even going through the transaction. There's so many different parties involved. And I lead most of the I guess I led all the transactions we've done here. And so it takes a toll. I mean, it's kind of just constant. But on the other side of it, I'm thrilled. And I would say that not every employee maybe understands the benefit of it, especially younger employees, like, because it's a qualified retirement plan. It's not like they just out of the gate, they get a whole bunch of whatever. It's just not how it works. But if we sell the company, they would immediately benefit. If we decide to start doing distributions at some point, they would benefit. So there is upside, but it takes a minute to get there. And I say we have some really smart, phenomenal leadership, as well as phenomenal adults that work for us that have been with us a while, and they totally get it. They're so excited by it, and they're working really hard to make sure we're not being wasteful or inefficient in lots of ways. And I think that I think we're all still kind of learning too what this looks like and how much am I going to own and what does that even look, what does that even matter? And then kind of explaining we're not a public company, so you can't just sell your stock once you invest into it. That's not how it works either. So, I mean, there's a lot of education around it, which we're still doing. I mean, we just converted. It's not that, it's been a hot minute.
Yeah.
And there's like another 6 months of process that still happens in the setup of the ESOP. So, overall, I think it was positive. Even though it was hard, it was really expensive as well, which was kind of a bummer. But I feel like on the other side of it, we have a phenomenal company owned by employees. And we have an added benefit of the ESOPs, which is how ESOPs even became a word in cannabis. And that is when these were developed in the 70s, it was really about government in trying to entice companies to give equity to their employees as a win, right? As the right thing to do. And in order to entice them further, the basic tenet of being an ESOP is that you're not charged federal income tax or state income tax. Massachusetts has a tiny little bit of income tax for ESOPs, but it's nothing compared to 280E taxation. So the idea is that you free up all that tax money that you would be paying, and you use that to go back into the company or to add to workforce or whatever the case might be with those savings. It just doesn't happen overnight because you have to pay for the ESOP process, and so that takes a minute. But knowing that we stop the clock on taxes is enormously helpful for all of our projections and everything that we do every day, knowing that we don't have this massive tax bill mounting.
What was it like working with MBO Ventures?
I didn't really work directly with, I worked directly with our bankers. That's really who I worked with, and our attorneys. So yeah.
Okay. It sounds like it was pretty challenging, but for other cannabis operators, would you recommend an ESOP?
I don't think it's a one size fits all. And here's why. For small cannabis operators, there is a tax strategy of if your revenue is below a certain number, and I want to say the average, don't quote me on this, but it's like, let's say it has to be below $20 million or $18 million over a 3-year period. You can use traditional GAAP accounting and deduct more than you would be able to deduct with 280E. That's something that is a strategy that some people are using. And those companies, maybe they only have 4 employees or 5 employees because it's a small little shop or something. And so that strategy might not be as thoughtful for them, especially knowing how expensive the ESOP process is. And like all in with your attorneys, the ESOP attorneys, the bankers, the valuation team, the trustee. I mean, it's $1.5 million. That's what you're going to need to write a check for. And a lot of these tiny little companies, that's not ever going to happen. So it's not for everyone. The other thing is, if you only have a few employees, if you don't have a ton of employees, it becomes a little bit challenging to keep the ownership at a certain level, which is what needs to happen for ESOP world. And so I think there's a couple of weird things that you can't do it if you are certain, and it doesn't make sense to do it if you're a certain size. If you're fabulously profitable, that's also a challenge, because the last thing you want to do if you're killing it is all of a sudden hand all of that over to employees. And you can't do only half, like you can in normal world, you could do half. Mm-hmm. You could do like 50, I'm going to ESOP 50% of the company, I'm going to keep 50% of the company. In cannabis though, if you do that, you still have 100% 280E risk. Okay. So it doesn't make sense. So this was 100% transaction of our company. And basically that's how it works. And by the way, I'm still really learning about it. It is a complicated beast, but, so far the benefit I see it really clearly, and the taxes, we've stopped the clock ticking on taxes, and, we've provided a pretty cool incentive for employees. And now we just need the business to perform.
Does the news about potential and likely rescheduling change your mind about the decision at all?
No, because I think that's a significantly long runway. I'll give you an example. So let's just say we didn't do this process in 24. Our 23, 24, our 24 projected tax burden was like $4 million. I don't care who you are. If I can stop the clock on that, I'm stopping the clock. I mean, it just doesn't, I can hope and pray for this to be the fastest thing ever. But by the way, I don't think in my lifetime we've ever seen this process before. So how do we know how it's going to go? And how do we know that it's not just going to apply to medical companies? How do we know that if the election doesn't go a certain way in November, that this all just stops? We don't know any of it. And so what I knew for sure is if I wrote this check to pay for the ESOP process, that I stopped the clock on taxes. And that was, in my opinion, the smartest fiduciary decision I could make with regards to the company. And it's like our biggest expenditures, our paying taxes. It's crazy.
Well, Meg, I really do appreciate you taking the time today and your insight into the Massachusetts market. Before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about yourself or Canna Provisions?
Yeah. I would say that don't take it for granted that we have regulated markets in a whole bunch of states. I mean, I know that it looks really great, like we're making a bunch of progress. But at the end of the day, there are hundreds of thousands, if not a million people in prison for this plant. And that people are still arrested today for cannabis. And that there are still medical refugees who can't get safe access to cannabis for their kids or themselves. So they're living on a relative sofa in a state that does have safe access. They had to leave their state in order to go get safe access for their kids or themselves. And I feel like we just gloss over that, and it's still happening. And more people were arrested in Colorado last year than the previous year. So we need to really get this right. We need to figure this out, because it's not okay with me that people are in prison today for nonviolent drug offenses. And it's not okay with me that we have people that are still getting arrested and that patients don't have safe access. So that's really important.
So keep up the fight.
The fight is just beginning, in my opinion.
Well, Meg, thank you again. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. It was really great to meet you.
Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Meg Sanders, CEO of Canna Provisions, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. We'll see you next week.